Our next speaker is Councillor Walker.
I've been listening for the last 5 or 6 hours of the debate here, and I've been through all these budget proposals and the freezes that took place early on in the Mel Lastman era, but most particularly the commitments and in my opinion, the escalating out-of-control increases in the budget that have been taking place under the Miller era. And it is, if it's good, we should do it, and we should do it now, and be damned about the money, we'll get the money somewhere. When we're dealing with this operating budget, the non-program expenditures have increased by 14.6%. The bulk of that is to account for wage increases. But we can't seem to get our hands around that, and we're voting on an operating budget today when we don't know what the impacts of the wages in the City of Toronto are. What we did have coming out of the blue last week at Executive Committee was the Mayor unilaterally said that we're going to freeze the 4,000 non-union and management staff salaries. And the increases over and above the maximum, they're going to be removed. But it was done without any consultation. And the question has to be, well, is that fair and equitable, and is that just? Is that good for morale? Is that good for productivity? When in the next breath, because it was asked, well, let's deal with our salaries, your salary, Mayor. Let's lead and do that at the same time. Oh, no, we can't do that. And then the suggestion is, well, we can't deal with the union salaries because they're negotiated. Well, there was an informal negotiation with non-union and management staff before, up until now. But the issue is we need to give some guidance in terms of what this negotiation should be. And if it's zero for non-union and management, why shouldn't that be the criteria for negotiations for the union staff, which will be close to all the union staff $100 million of additional costs to the city on the assumption that it's 3%. You know, you look in this figure here, nobody will say, we don't know what we're negotiating with the unions for. What is the target we're aiming for? I suspect it's 3%. Is that reasonable in March? It might have been reasonable in September, but the question has to be, is it reasonable in March? Are the solutions for General Motors today reasonable in March, but maybe, or not reasonable in March, but were they reasonable back a year ago? And the answer is more than likely they were, but there's a different crisis at play today. And General Motors is on the ropes, and it could go under, because the decisions were not made years ago and last year, the hard decisions. It was incrementalism under that Wagoner guy, that head of that General Motors, and he finally had to be turfed. And it's the same thing here. This proposal today, this alternative, is a modest proposal. Does it go far enough? Should people be paying a tax increase? Should it be 2%? Should it be 4%? Why is the question not asked, should it be 0%? If the objective here is to basically maintain a flat line in terms of services, but in this crisis, but we're talking about expansion. We're talking about big-time expenditures of money we don't have. We're already 450 or 500 million short because it's not renewable money. It won't be here next year. Councillor Holliday has said it. Councillor Milchin said it. Many people have said it. That money isn't sustainable. So next year, we're going to be 500 million short before we even start the exercise. But there's been no debate, no questioning around the increases for the TTC, 48.7% and 35.5%, the two components. Because the TTC is not talking about maintaining the service they've got, and certainly in a meeting I held, which over 200 people attended, relative to the TTC properties, we had to spend the first half hour getting over people criticizing the level of service on the subway on Yonge Street. I had to listen to the people out on that issue, broken escalators for months and months, and other deficiencies.
Move an extension.
Why are we increasing the service when we can't even maintain what we already have, and we're asking 4,000 of our staff to take freezes outside of any other process that which the union staff, the 52,000 or 48,000 staff? The question is on police. The police are getting a 4% increase. But there's a minimum of 35 new officers. Maybe it's desirable to get them, but we just have to ask the question, is this the year to do it, or is this the year to flatline that salary? And redirect any of that money to establish a reserve in the area of the greatest crisis, people losing their jobs and going on welfare. It's going to go to 100,000, 90,000 over the year average. We better hope it only goes to 90. We are in a crisis that you haven't even, we're talking about General Motors going under. We're talking about banks with billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of assets that have turned into mush. We're talking about government having to bail everybody out. And this isn't a provincial government. Even if the mayor wants to pretend it's like a provincial government, it isn't. It cannot come in and debt finance and constantly spend money to say, we're just going to fill it in. Bob Rae had that problem, but at least he had a social contract. He could legislate a rewrite of contracts that are already in place. We don't have that authority. But what we do have the authority is to enter the negotiations asking for that sacrifice from the 48,000 people here who in unions who work for the city. It's better to have a good-paying job with a flat line on your salary with basic job guarantee than to lose your job like they are losing them in Chrysler and General Motors and Magna and every major company out there. And it's not reasonable that we're still behaving like General Motors was behaving 5, 10, and 15 years ago, and we ended up in that crisis with a private sector corporation.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.